This is the Power Podcast. My name is Sarah of Underground Crowds. We hit Bible topics, smash book studies, punch out some songs here and there, and light up His Word to strengthen our souls. Thanks for listening. Okay, let's get started. We are going to continue here. I do not need my headphones. They're like a security blanket. I don't know what the deal is. Anyway, we're going to continue into a sad part of justice. And when we consider justice and wanting justice and feel we deserve justice, we need to bear in mind that there is a sad element to justice and how it pains God's heart. So let's pray. And this might be a short one, depending on how the Lord meets us. Lord, I pray that you guide us through this last part of Judges. Help us to keep in mind what justice means from your side. We know what justice means down here, but it's inconsistent. It's not thorough. Sometimes the wrong people are thrown under the bus. Sometimes wars last forever, and it's got nothing to do with your kind of justice. So I pray that you would refocus us and help us to lean into your understanding of justice. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're starting at Judges chapter 20, verse 13. And I'm not going to get through the chapter. It doesn't take very long. It's only a few verses. Now then, deliver up the men, the worthless fellows in Gibeah, that we may put them to death. And now, if you have not listened to the other podcasts, I would strongly recommend that you do so. But we have gone through the Levi and his concubine and gathering the men of Israel. And now they are going into Gibeah and facing the Benjaminites, a tribe of Israel. And they're about to render justice, so that we may put them to death and remove this wickedness from Israel. But the sons of Benjamin would not listen to the voice of the brothers and the sons of Israel. That's another key element when it comes to justice, when it comes to bearing judgment. I have a strong suspicion that the Benjaminites were like, we're no worse than you. But see, as we covered in our first podcast, this doesn't have the kind of bearing in God's justice that we think it should. I was also thinking that this is for the woman in an abusive, or man in an abusive relationship. Just because you can drag up all the things that you've done as 50% of the problem or whatever, it doesn't make an excuse for ongoing injustice. And that's really all I'm going to say about that. And we talked about how you need a tribe. We talked about to keep your eyes away from hate, to keep your desires away from revenge, to help you be mindful that if God does something and He does something drastic, you can't carry that. And that is solely God's business. And a lot of times, it's not necessarily the kind of justice we were looking for. He did a work in us, or changed the heart of that other person. And we have to be very careful. We're not dragging in our hatred. We're not dragging in our bitterness. We're not dragging in that which isn't fruitful to bringing about justice. So here we are. The Benjaminites are confronted, and they're like, meh. That doesn't mean, just because maybe in this situation there's complacency, or there's blame shifting, or there's, I can think of racial injustice and systemic racism. It's really all around. Does that excuse does that make an excuse for other sin? No, that absolutely doesn't make an excuse for other sin. If you've got the sin of laziness, or whatever it is that God doesn't have for you. Yeah, okay. But be mindful of this. What God sees is the reality. And it doesn't matter how we ignore systemic racism, or cover it up, or minimize it. It doesn't matter how we want to shift it into a political discussion and make this red versus blue. It doesn't matter. When God sees an oppressed people, He sees an oppressed people. And we can, by this account, regardless of what the whole of Israel, and we know that they were steeped in idolatry, regardless of where the whole of Israel stood at that point. When he looked at Gibeon, he looked at the Benjaminites, he saw gross wickedness. And it produced fruit. And they faced it together, without the bitterness, without the revenge, without the getting their eyes on their own gains. They went after God's glory. And you know that because, because of what it took from them in the process of judgment. And the sons of Benjamin gathered from the cities of Gibeah to go out to battle against the sons of Israel. From the cities on that day, the sons of Benjamin were numbered 26,000 men who draw the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who were numbered 700 choice men. Another thing that we need to note about this is that the Benjaminites are basically shunning their inheritance. In the sense that they are taking their identity as part of Israel lightly. And they're willing to fight their own brother for the sake of their sin. There's another time we saw that with Esau and Jacob. And Esau was like, I'd rather have bread than an inheritance. And God saw that as extremely wicked. And we could go on to another study concerning that, but what you're seeing here is steep rebellion. No, we're not going to honor God, and no, we're not going to honor the name of Israel or the other tribes of Israel that we belong to. Out of all these people, 700 choice men were left-handed. Each one could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. And then the men of Israel, besides Benjamin, were numbered 400,000 men who draw the sword. All these were men of war. Now the sons of Israel rose, went up to Bethel, and inquired of God and said, Who shall go up first for us to battle against the sons of Benjamin? Then the Lord said, Judah, go up first. So the sons of Israel rose in the morning and camped against Gibeah. It'd be interesting to know why it was Judah first. But I could go on all the tracks, but I'm not going to. Then the men of Israel went out to battle against Benjamin, and the men of Israel arrayed for battle against them at Gibeah. And the sons of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and felled to the ground on that day 22,000 men of Israel. But the people, the men of Israel, encouraged themselves and arrayed for battle again in the place where they had arrayed themselves the first day. And the sons of Israel went up and wept before the Lord. When it's going to clean out, and we know this principally, when there's a cleaning out to do, it's often going to come to us first. The sons of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until the evening, and inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall we again draw near for battle against the sons of my brother Benjamin? And the Lord said, Go up against him. Then the sons of Israel came against the sons of Benjamin the second day. Benjamin went out against them from Gibeah the second day, and fell to the ground again 18,000 men of the sons of Israel. All these drew the sword. Then all the sons of Israel and all the people there cleaned out again. Then all the sons of Israel and all the people went up and came to Bethel and wept. Thus they remained there before the Lord and fasted the day until the evening. And they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. Where were they at? They were steeped in idolatry. What was God doing? Turning their hearts. Rest assured. God's going to do that work. God's going to get it done. There's going to be justice in this place, but there's going to be pain involved. The sons of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, Aaron's son, stood before to minister in those days, saying, Shall I yet again go out to battle against the sons of my brother Benjamin, or shall I cease? And the Lord said, Go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hand. So Israel set men in ambush around Gibeah. And the sons of Israel went up against the sons of Benjamin on the third day, and arrayed themselves against Gibeah as at other times. And the sons of Benjamin went out against the people and were drawn away from the city, and they began to strike and kill some of the people as at other times on the highways, and one which goes up to Bethel, and the other to Gibeah, and in the field about 30 men of Israel. And the sons of Benjamin said, They are struck down before us as at the first. But the sons of Israel said, Let us flee, we may draw them away from the city to the highways. And then all the men of Israel rose from their place and arrayed themselves at Baal Tamar. And the men of Israel in ambush, I'm reading way more than I thought, ambush broke out of their place, even out of Meribah. Then 10,000 choice men from all Israel came against Gibeah. The battle became fierce. But Benjamin did not know that disaster was close to them. And the Lord struck Benjamin before Israel. So the sons of Israel destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day, all who draw the sword. So the sons of Benjamin saw that they were defeated. When the men of Israel gave ground to Benjamin because they relied on the men in ambush whom they had set against Gibeah, the men in ambush hurried and rushed against Gibeah, and the men in ambush also deployed and struck all the city with the edge of the sword. Now the appointed sign between men of Israel and men in ambush was that they would make a great cloud of smoke rise from the city. Then the men of Israel turned in the battle, and Benjamin began to strike and kill about 30 men of Israel. For they said, surely they are defeated before us, as in the first battle. But when the cloud began to rise from the city in a column of smoke, wow! Benjamin looked behind them, and behold, the whole city was going up in smoke to heaven. What a reminder! What a reminder of whose they are and who they belong to. Then the men of Israel turned, and the men of Benjamin were terrified, for they saw that disaster was close to them. Therefore they turned their backs from before the men of Israel toward the direction of the wilderness. This key word there. But the battle overtook them, while those who came out of the cities destroyed them in the midst of them. They surrounded Benjamin, pursued them without rest, and trod them down opposite Gibeah toward the east. Thus 18,000 men of Benjamin fell. All these were valiant warriors. The rest turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon. And they caught 5,000 of them on the highways and overtook them at Gideon and killed 2,000 of them. So all of Benjamin who fell that day were 25,000 men who draw the sword. All of these were valiant warriors. But 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and they remained at the rock of Rimmon 4 months. And the men of Israel then turned back against the sons of Benjamin, struck them with the edge of the sword, both the entire city with cattle and all that they found. And they also set on fire all the cities which they found. Now the men of Israel had sworn to Mizpah, saying, none of us, this is chapter 21, none of us shall give his daughter to Benjamin in marriage. So the people came to Bethel and sat there before God until the evening and lifted their voice and wept bitterly. They had just defeated Benjamin. But what were their hearts broken over? The separation that they now experienced between themselves and Benjamin. To go against your own brother. They mentioned this, they said this twice. Shall we go up against our brother? They must have had serious doubts as to whether or not this was a good idea. They must have struggled with carrying out this justice. It must have plagued them as the battle turned against them over and over again. Is this the right path? Justice is always the right path. I hear some, now you have to be careful here because there is nothing beyond the importance of the gospel. At all. I mean, we don't have any cause for justice. But there's a lot of red flag waving that churches are turning into justice leagues. And all it is getting sidetracked off the gospel. Now, I believe that we can find things that are wrong and things that need to be, that we're always going to find something off. We're always going to find something that maybe is a cause. And so then we're just so spread out all over every justice issue, and no longer does the gospel have any place. But what would be the reason for that? It's because we're just spread out over all these justice issues. But justice isn't the problem. It's hearing from God that's the problem. Who did they go back to twice? God's weeding out their own idolatries. They're losing men in battle. They're being changed by this whole process. Who were they waiting to hear from? You know, the majority of the problem with justice causes today is that it's unsacrificial. It's a platitude. It's virtue signaling. It costs nothing. That's not what I see here. To carry out real justice costs something. So it's not justice that's the issue. It's whether or not we're listening to God, A, and 2, whether or not it's costing us anything. I think that's how we can really assess whether or not this is a worthy thing to rally behind. Because if it doesn't require anything from me but my mouth and my opinions, my platitudes, and my virtue signaling, if it doesn't cost me anything, it might be a justice issue, but it's not going to bring about justice. What did it cost Christ to bring about justice? You know that God's wrath was laid upon his own Son. It cost him everything to make a way for us to escape hell. So when we think about what it is we really want, God's been guiding me through this. My own cries for justice. And I already know what it's going to cost. And frankly, lots of the time I was like them. I was like, really? Lord, are you sure you want me to go back out there? Are you sure you want me to walk this road? I was slaughtered yesterday. Are we sure this is worthwhile to turn against our own brother? In Israel's case, to annihilate our own brother, a part of Israel. That's the kind of heart that we should have when it comes to justice. So, A, we're looking at, are we hearing from God on this justice issue? Is it a sacrifice? And do we mourn over it? Do we have such heart for those that are going to inevitably fall under God's justice and judgment that we mourn? That it shakes us up, because we might be on the wrong justice cause if this isn't part of the makeup here. Because that's God's kind of justice. It ripped his heart out of his chest, sent it to earth, and hung it on a cross. We don't just fling around justice. We don't just fling around judgment. We don't just decide they need to be judged. It's not how it works. All of it fell on Christ. And it took everything out of God to do it. Everything. I don't know if you have a kid, but it's like your heart walking around outside your chest. And it's no different with God the Father. In fact, we're talking about eternity past, eternity future. We're talking about they've always been. And so we can't fathom the kind of closeness. God the Father. Between God the Father and God the Son. It's not something we can touch on. It's something we can kind of maybe get a glimpse of. But it grieved them. Tribe that was part of them. To have to turn against them. But, and this is longer than I thought it would be. What happens if we don't pray for justice? What happens if we just keep going in that abusive relationship? What happens if we just put up with the bullying at school? You stop being a catalyst for the gospel. That's the choice you make. Because justice is an avenue for the gospel. It absolutely is. Peace out. Again, thanks for listening. Catch the next part of this series, usually Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. You can also find Underground Crowds on Twitter, Patreon, Bandcamp, or undergroundcrowds.com.